Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Miska, Executive Director of First Amendment Voice. Are you concerned about the state of civil discourse in our country or maybe even in your own community? If you want to help FAV bring programming like the discussion you're getting ready to watch to others, please consider going to our website at firstamendmentvoice.org and click on the Join tab. You can learn about the benefits of membership and become a part of a movement reinvigorating and understanding about freedoms of speech, religion, the press, assembly, and petition. And if you like our videos, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's First Amendment Voice, all one word, .org, O-R-G. Thank you, and enjoy the webinar. Hey everybody, I'm Steve Miska, the Executive Director of First Amendment Voice. Welcome to the next webinar in our National Symposium. This is the first year that we have done a National Symposium virtually. Usually it's in person. Obviously, because of the pandemic, we are in the virtual space. That is really a blessing in many ways because we've been able to reach out to speakers from across the country. We exhibit that right here with LA, Colorado, Virginia, and Texas all represented on just this panel. So it's so cool, and that's the same for our listeners, the attendees who are listening in, and it'll be the same also for a lot of the other folks who get to watch this video that we'll produce, and that'll be put out later on. So thank you so much for joining us. We chose this theme intentionally because the theme of the overall symposium, which is how the pandemic impacts civic engagement, because I think a lot of us have this idea that our freedom of speech or freedom of religion or freedom of the press, these are static. And that's just not the case. They get impacted. A panel this morning discussed how they get impacted by foreign actors and events, how a pandemic shapes our ability to express ourselves or assemble and protest and attempt to petition the government for grievance. And so just along those lines, technology also impacts the way we express ourselves, the way we consume information. And so we've got an all-star panel here today to discuss that topic and theme. And Yael Swerdlow will be our moderator. She is one of our First Amendment Voice Advisory Council members. She is the CEO of Maestro Games. Really takes a level of talent and innovation to take music and what she does with her startup. So I'm just really blessed that you're willing to be here with us, Yael. I know how difficult it is to get your time, so thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, also I wanted to say I'm also a recovering photojournalist and played in the tech space. This is my second startup. The first one actually was more photojournalist based and about photo sharing. And so I am very deep in the technology area of impact. In terms of the First Amendment, obviously it's near and dear to my heart because I've been on both sides. And so I'd like to be able to also talk to I'm very pleased to introduce the rest of the panel. And that is Ken and Julianne and Virginia. And I believe you guys have the bios. So I want to jump in with a question and say, first of all, when you wake up in the morning, when each one of you wake up in the morning, what is the first technology that you do? Do you check your phone? Do you check your email? Do you go on social media feeds? What's the first thing that you guys do first thing in the morning to see what's transpired during the night? I'll start with, let's go with, start with Julianne. I have to unmute you, I believe. Okay, there you go.
I usually start by checking my email.
So. Okay, is there a reason why?
Usually because that's the way most people that I personally know will reach me.
Okay. Do you graduate then to, before you have your coffee, do you have a social media habit?
I just entered the social media world under a year ago because I've
Oh my
avoided
gosh.
it like the plague.
Okay.
I prefer to have real-time face-to-face contact with individuals.
Okay.
So the only social media you will find me on is Instagram these days.
Okay. And then now I'm going to go over to Ken. What is the first thing that you do?
I'm ashamed to say this, but I pick up my phone and I check the news. And like Julian, I don't really have any social media presence. I think social media is a tabloid, and so I avoid it again, like she does, like to play. I do have an Instagram account, so I can keep up with my children. But the first thing that I do generally is check the news, and then from there I'll start checking email. Generally, my business partners are overseas, and so for me, I get a lot of emails and things that I need to attend to um, via email. I think that I'm getting a lot of feedback. So
You are. Okay, so I'll go over to Virginia, but what I wanted to then come back with, what your news sources were, but we'll get to that in a little while. So Virginia, what is your first habit in the morning?
Well, my very first habit is definitely to turn off my alarm, right? That particular tune is probably one of the most annoying tunes in my life, but it gets me up, so that's great. So first thing is definitely to turn that off. Usually I get up and kind of am jumping into kind of my work day or whatever I have planned for the day. So usually I'm not checking my phone or using technology. Usually grab a cup of tea and sit for a few minutes just with my thoughts to start out with. And then honestly, the first thing I do when I pick up my phone after that is to check the Bitcoin price. So for those of you who know what cryptocurrency is, know about Bitcoin, usually am curious to see what the opening is for that. So that's kind of my routine. And then usually as the day goes on, using Instagram and then Twitter primarily as a news source.
Okay, and so Abel, what is your first habit?
I do make an intentional effort not to check technology first thing in the morning. If I can avoid it, I try to push it off. And so I'll try to stay on just low-key notebooks, dream journal for a little bit, try to do a spiritual reading, squeeze that in. And then the first thing I check is usually the weather. And for social media, I'll check is probably Instagram stories to see if a friend has tagged you, because some of those things disappear, and that's one of the lures of a lot of the more recent social media networks.
Wow. Okay, so I'm a basically complete failure compared to the rest of all of you. I now have a list of better practices than the horrific habits that I have in the morning. So I wanted to dive right in on the hard question of what's been going on with the movie, the social dilemma and the great hack and all of the other blowback, frankly. And it's ironic that today is Facebook Connect, where Zuckerberg is telling the world about all the next things that Facebook is going to do. Among them, smart glasses and all sorts of things that he's talking about. And so much of the importance of what the conversations are during this symposium have to do with the fact that we're not listening to each other and we're talking past each other. And meanwhile, technology is coming at a faster pace and a more furious pace and more polarizing pace. And so what I wanted to have each one of you answer is what you think about the fact that technology is being thrown at us the way that it is, and how you feel it's impacting our ability to not only speak our truth, but be heard. So Abel, as long as I'm with you right now, let's start with you.
Sure. And this has developed a lot in the past few months, but it didn't start in the past few months either. When it comes to shadow banning and censorship, not just of people, but of ideas, that has been going on for a long time. And as someone who's, for people who don't know my background, I've been an independent creator for 10 years in the space of health primarily, but before that, a musician, where there are other, you know, ways of using your voice, and a lot of times it's a little bit more edgy. And so it's been really interesting to try to balance that over the years. And what I've seen is especially in the last few years and months, a lot of leaders in the world of health, in the world of art, who have their Wikipedia pages deleted, who all of a sudden have, have no reach on social media, or are completely deplatformed, or and I've experienced some of this as well, where you can't upload videos about certain topics, or you can't successfully post some bit of text with a certain word in it. Or, you know, very strange things happen, it seems, to a lot of people, and more people are realizing it from the top down, but there is no real way to appeal this. There's no person to go to. In a lot of cases, there's no customer service contact for these giant platforms where you have hundreds of thousands of followers, or millions of followers in a lot of cases. There's no point of contact. So this is something that everyone is taking note of right now. We know it's a big problem, but the way out of it, I think there are a lot of promises, and certainly speaking to cryptocurrency, that's one of them. When you have a decentralized network, and censorship and shadow banning and throttling different people here and there based on your own reasons or reasoning or political beliefs or whatever it may be, that becomes difficult or completely impossible to do. So there's a lot of promise here too.
Okay. Do you have a line? Well, I'll ask that in a minute. Ken, what about you? Ken? You may have dropped off. See, technology has its limitations.
He's on mute.
Oh, he is. Okay, let me unmute him. Ken, are you unmuted now? It's not. I need a little.
How about now?
There you go. That's perfect. Okay.
Okay, so I don't know about the feedback thing, and I apologize. Okay. Yeah, and so you know, as a law enforcement, a former law enforcement professional, I'm retired. I'd like to take a different angle or stab at this. So, and talk about individuals and, you know, after posting something, are using technology as a vehicle for expressing their freedoms of speech, et cetera, that when you post something and that you may think is funny, you might think it's dumb, you may think, you know, it's the 15-minute fame syndrome. And even if they believe that, you know, they're providing a service, there's very little they can do to mitigate that action, meaning that after you post something, you are pretty much tied to that post forever, and it will follow you, and it has a very long memory. And so, you know, why is this important? And first, it's just, you know, again, for young folks, it is especially important because they have a long time to live with that. I'm retired. I'm an FBI retired agent. You know, I'm not worried about something I wrote in the 80s necessarily. And so let's talk about employers. So your social media post is your resume to the world, right? And companies are beginning to look at social media posts as part of their standard pre-employment background investigations. And, you know, they're desperate to avoid controversial things and statements tied to them. They want to avoid, you know, things mistakenly being confused as a representation of the company or the culture or anything else. You know, the last thing they want to see is, you know, take Amazon. You know, Amazon employee said this, I did that. They don't want that. And if they can avoid that, they will. And so, meaning that you won't get hired, or you may lose your employment. You know, companies, they hire at will, and they can get rid of you as fast as you can quit, except for things that are protected, race, religion, etc. And so I just wanted to get folks to understand in the context of what you're asking, that there are limitations to freedom of speech, and there are implications, and that, you know, before folks think about doing something, they ought to consider, you know, what the possible implications are. I think, you know, it's a good idea anyway.
Yeah, I know that colleges are looking at, at your social media feed as well. And so along with your SAT scores, there's a panic scramble to delete your social media feeds when you sent out your college applications.
And folks they should understand that anything created electronically can never be deleted.
Well, I'm going to come back to you on that one for a primer. And so Virginia, falls to you now. How do you feel about the onslaught of technology coming at us so fast and furiously, and how it impacts our ability to listen?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, over the past, multiple years, I think people have really increasingly acknowledged or begun to see the impact that technology and digital habits have on their lives, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's important as a starting place. It's a wonderful starting place to begin to develop digital habits. But I really think that people need to begin going beyond digital habits to what I would consider a digital philosophy, right? So we really need to have a consistent philosophy that, whatever our religious beliefs are, even what our political beliefs are, to have this cohesive philosophy, because the tech companies, they have philosophies, right? And actually some of the most successful tech companies are the ones that have the most robust philosophy behind them, even if you're not necessarily kind of seeing that philosophy consciously, it's definitely there. So I think, to go beyond digital habits, which is a great starting point, and to really understand what your own digital philosophy is. And I don't think that it's just the individual either. I think you can begin to think about this in terms of your family or the organization that you work for, the institutions that you're part of. So I think that's a really good starting place to be able to deal with kind of this current moment of technology and the onslaught like you were talking about, and the ability to listen. So really that really takes a lot of personal reflection. And I would add to that, even as we're seeing these concerns about censorship, one of the biggest ways that we are censored is self-censorship, right? We don't want to have that social backlash or those kinds of things. But we've substituted that self-censorship. It's a substitute for self-reflection, right? So we actually need to, instead of simply, you can say on one hand, okay, self-censorship is a good thing, right? You don't want to just say whatever is, coming to mind in the moment, like Ken was saying, but really that doesn't actually entail reflection, right? Like, is what I'm saying profitable? Is it helpful? So I think that's, those are two really core starting places for people to be able to deal with this current digital age.
I definitely agree. And I love the idea of self-reflection versus self-censorship, because, the hashtag speak your truth is sometimes just thrown out there as a way to say things that may not be as reflective of the other person's space, if you will, that can be. I also want to remind our audience members to throw whatever questions in the Q&A, to please ask questions, comments, and we're virtual, so you can't throw anything at us, but please go ahead and let us know what you're thinking and the questions you may have. I think I also wanted to ask Abel, with your health podcasts, the level of, obviously in your reach, which is global, the level of responsibility that you may or feel to present accurate information and what the issues are with that, and kind of expand on the idea of the self-reflection, I guess, that Virginia brought up.
Yeah, it can be honestly crippling. Before every time, to Ken's point, every time I open my mouth or type something, which is constantly, right? Like just this 10 plus years, a constant stream of consciousness in some cases where I'm literally live streaming like this and things come out. I stand behind everything that I say as much as I can. That doesn't mean that I'm 100% accurate every time. Nobody is, right? So you have to navigate that in your own unique way and try to be as honest as you possibly can while biting your tongue, while self-censoring, because you know that certain words, certain topics have become politicized that didn't used to be, or you're at risk of being ripped down or being called a shill or whatever else just by using particular terms that didn't used to be that way. So for a lot of people, it's to some degree generational. The use of language, I mean, where some people in the health space are more comfortable using some words than others. But one of the things that's really come up recently that I've had to struggle with, obviously, is the pandemic and the terminology there and kind of the back and forth. Okay, what is the official story here? What does the data say? And it's been so just back and forth for everybody. I've done my best to avoid it for the most part explicitly. But when you're talking about health, especially a holistic point of view about health, we're actually talking about it all the time. So if you listen to something we recorded 10 years ago, we're still talking about immune health, even if you're going out and running marathons and you're kind of performing or competing athletically. If your immune system isn't in check and dialed in, you're not going to compete because you're up against the edge the whole time. So that's how I have dealt with it, at least temporarily, and a lot of my peers have as well, as we see some people around us be deplatformed for maybe being a little bit too generous with what they're saying about things, or the links they're putting between the immune system and viruses and all the rest of it. So it's difficult to navigate, but it's something that you kind of have to plow through and then just use honesty and transparency and truth, I believe, to stand behind whatever you said, whenever you said it, and then use that opportunity, if you can, to clarify. And a lot of times your community, your followers, not necessarily the press, but your community at large will be willing to hear you out even if you make a misstep.
Can you give me an idea of how much you are called out, just in a percentage, and where most of the call outs come from?
Yeah.
For those that don't know, please tell us what the reach is of your podcast.
We have over 50 million all-time downloads, and I've been doing it for coming up on 10 years. And so I do it once a week, and then it's video, audio, and I mean, when it has that kind of reach, that's not guaranteed, that could be taken away at any time. You don't even feel security in those numbers. That's another kind of thing at play.
Interesting. So and it's focused on health, and music. Do you touch, but because it's health in the pandemic, do you touch politics?
So in response to your question, when do I get called out? It's usually around things that are interpreted as political that I didn't necessarily intend to be so. So on top of the podcast, I also put out music, and I put out, like poetry books and things like that, where I do go closer to the edge of free expression. And I found there's a lot more tolerance there. So in terms of being called out, if you wrap it up in art, I found that if I rhyme it in kind of a clever way, then you can get away with saying almost anything. But if I'm just a talking head, I would not be able to present the same ideas in the same way without getting called out. So usually it's the things where, recently, it's been interesting. As a white male, I don't usually think of myself that way. I do more than ever because I'm being called out on racial issues, on sex issues, and a lot of people are asking for a political position that I'm not necessarily comfortable sharing, that might not be relevant in that context. So once again, you have to navigate that. But for the most part, I try to keep it nonpartisan, non-political, and open-minded.
And are you, in a way, like almost the BBC World Service, where you are able to be broadcast in countries that may have repressive regimes?
To some degree, yeah, to some degree. And you don't have a good, you don't have great insight into that unless you're really in good touch with your own community. So for me, it's been very interesting tracking this pandemic and the government responses and interactions with its own people throughout these different countries, and seeing, for the most part, the similarities, just the glaring similarities between people who are following us and kind of into the same world of health in all these different countries that are supposed to have different political systems that but are kind of handling this in exactly the same way. That's been really interesting.
So I have actually a really interesting follow-up question, and then I'm going to jump to Virginia and to Ken. One of our attendees, Chelsea Langston, wants to know how panelists would respond to cancel culture. And are there topics that deserve technological shunning, and which is a really interesting concept? And what's the tech anecdote to cancel culture? So since you're probably the person that is utilizing that technology in ways to spread culture, I would love to get your feedback on that.
One of my controversial posts was cancel culture. Back in June, I think I posted that, and some people flipped out. Some people loved it, some other people flipped out. For me, the context of that, I was seeing a lot of people who were peers of mine sharing their own belief systems that other people did not share with them on social media, and then that just kind of getting way out of control, people losing friendships, people losing connections, but saying that they'll never speak on stage with this person again, that they'll never go to the same event as this other person again, when I know in fact I've been in the same rooms with these people who they are friends. This never would have happened unless they were prevented from getting together in person and kind of working this out. The only way this happened was through Twitter and Facebook cancel culture, and Instagram and the rest of them now too. And so for me, I think it's extremely important to definitely, I do not disagree with Ken that we're on the hook for whatever we say. We have to have the responsibility side of it. You can't just have free speech and expression with no responsibility. But who is the one who is kind of controlling all of that? And we shouldn't wage cultural wars by rage mob on social media. That is the worst way to move our culture forward.
I love that thought. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but I wanted to jump over to Virginia and then Ken on the same question. Virginia, let's start with you. How do you see, well, first of all, how are we talking past each other? And then also, how do you feel that technology can be used to either rein in or not cancel culture?
Yeah, so I think for that second question, again, I think it really does go back to kind of, as you're thinking through these questions, it's helpful to consider your philosophy. And if you don't have a digital philosophy, just think about your philosophy in general, right? What's kind of your view of things? How would you go about something like this? So from my own perspective, I think technology is something that is neutral, right? I think there are a lot of these things in this world that are sort of by nature are neutral, right? They can be used both for good purposes as well as for maybe some bad purposes as well. So when it comes to even like this technological shunning, right? Are there topics that deserve that? I think in one sense, yes. But in another sense, I think you really just have to kind of start at that framework, those basic levels of things, to say, maybe it doesn't require always to, okay, we're gonna to blacklist someone, or we're gonna just completely give up using this platform. But it really takes a much more nuanced approach. So I'll kind of leave that there because I don't know that I'm like necessarily the most, I haven't really engaged with like that cancel culture very much, so I wouldn't be able to speak to that like as much specifically. But that's kind of where, again, not to belabor the point, but I think having whatever your moral approach and your philosophical approach would be to see the same situation in a an in-person setting, right? What do you do if someone in your community is going out and doing things that may or may not be harmful? What will be your approach there? And maybe it's not a direct correlation, but at the very least, you're having some sort of starting point, because I don't think that our digital lives should be reigned by a different way of going about things than we would in our everyday, in-person kind of lives. So I'll leave it there for now.
I'm going to come back to you on a follow-up after that. Ken, what are your thoughts on this?
Right. I don't have a lot more to add other than what Jim and Abel said. I think that, when you start looking at the cancel culture in general, that, the question is, okay, so if you're on one end, how much should I take of something before I say it's too much? I don't want it. I disagree, right? But I think that it is also now more of an intimidation to do what I say, otherwise you're done, right? And if I can get a lot of people to say the same thing, then you will change to view things the way I do. And so, and that to me is selfish, right? Because you're not dealing with, things that are necessarily different that may even strengthen us in the long run, because you have no tolerance for anything other than, what your favorite person said on their bumper sticker, so to speak. And so, I just, that's pretty much the way I see that. Again, there's two sides just about to everything, but the way I see it implemented now is more of a tool of intimidation.
And a perfect follow-up, actually, also from Chelsea Langston again. What can the organizations such as churches or schools or nonprofits or businesses do to harness technology ethically and to promote well-being rather than harm? So obviously cancel culture is being promoted heavily on social media feeds and in things. What are your thoughts of how music can be, that was a Freudian slip, sorry. How technology, how organizations can utilize technology for good. Somebody just sending me music. What's that?
Yeah, sorry. So I have do not disturb, but apparently that
All right. Technology has a life of its own, and we just want to ignore that fact.
Okay, how about now?
Nah, we're good.
The ring stop?
Yeah, we're fine. So what can organizations like churches and schools and nonprofits and businesses do to harness technology ethically? And again, it is a kind of ironic thing where we're talking about ethics and technology on the day that Facebook's announcing even more of their reach into our lives. So especially now with the pandemic and Zoom, I mean, I know I'm doing on Shabbat, I'll do a Shabbat service, and the Jewish high holidays are coming up at the end of this week. And I'm, already kind of crying that I'm going to be doing this on Zoom as opposed to in person. So what are your thoughts on what can be done by the places where we're now forced to interact in so many ways online? How about Virginia? Can I start with you on that?
Yeah, so hopefully you take the instance of a school right now, right? So students are facing a huge just kind of disruption to their educational life, which really spills over into a lot of areas, other areas of their life as well, right? So I think for schools and organizations that are seeking to, for an example, to help those students, look at, and hopefully you already have this in place, to say, what are the values that we really hold to when serving children, right? We want to make sure that there's equity. We want to make sure that the students have equal access to education. We want to make sure that students have the food that they need. They have the supportive environment that they need. And so if you can take those values that you have as an organization or as a school and then begin to say, okay, let's look at each of these values through the lens of the pandemic, as well as technology, right? So access to internet, what kinds of schooling is provided, what other kinds of supports are being added for parents and children right now. That's one way to kind of to take something that you probably already have, those values that are in place, and really just kind of systematically to go through and say, hey, let's, I think it's important also to get feedback from the people that you're serving or from other organizations who are doing similar work and say, how are you approaching this? Are there kids in your district or that you're serving who are having access issues or food insecurity? And then to be able to really work toward those things, positively and proactively, and really meet the people that you're serving where they're at. So I think that's just an example, but to really take those values that you have, to systematically go through and getting those feedback from individuals as well as other institutions that are trying to address that need. So that's definitely a starting place.
Are there ideas maybe that you would suggest, for example, for a business to be able to move technology forward in not doing harm? I mean, and you mentioned cryptocurrency a little while ago. Are there concrete examples that you feel can be done to make things more equitable for folks that may be disadvantaged, for example, for learning and things like that?
Yeah, so, things like Bitcoin and cryptocurrency are still very emergent. It's only been around, Bitcoin, which is the oldest one, has only been around for about 10 years. So I think it still remains to be seen kind of a lot of what those use cases will be. And most of those right now are kind of focused rather naturally in the financial sector, right? And I think that there are a lot of things that can be thought through there in terms of how can we bring equity. So just as a very quick example, accepting payments through Bitcoin or something like that, where it's an easy digital transfer of funds, can actually provide a lot of equity for people who, the MoneyGram and the usual systems that they have to pay bills is exorbitant, right? There's these insane fees, the inconvenience, sometimes even the safety risks of having to go to a store or a place like that and do your transfer. So when it comes to like financial matters, I think that organizations should consider if we're a leasing office and we want our tenants to be able to pay through digital payments, maybe instead of having them do a cashier's check or a money order or something like that, Western Union, right? To be able to say, okay, we're going to accept, things through Bitcoin. And there's a lot of, thankfully, there's a lot of new platforms now that are making that easier for businesses to adopt. So you're not on your own in doing something like that. So I think when it comes to cryptocurrency, definitely it's more in the financial sector, at least for the moment. Yeah, I think that's one thing. Again, it's a difficult thing, kind of getting to what Abel was saying in terms of you have a podcast or you have a following, you're often kind of, you only have access to that following through that platform that you're on, right? And so you're kind of beholden to the owners of that platform as to whether they're going to change the algorithm so you show up less, or you're going to be blacklisted or gray listed maybe. And so I don't actually quite know what the solution is there when you're thinking about kind of these big platforms that have a lot of control in our lives. How to deal with that, I think, is one of the really pressing issues that we're facing right now. And there aren't necessarily, I've encountered any like really good solutions for that yet. So I definitely be curious to hear what other people have to say about that one.
Well, yeah, Ken, we're going to go over to you on that. And two-part question then, in terms of the first question, which is what organizations and churches and schools and businesses and nonprofits to harness technology and promote well-being. And then I would also would love to have you answer Virginia's point as well. Let me unmute you. I think there are two, are you unmuted or no?
Unmute
Okay, there you go. Okay.
it now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me or no? Okay, good. And so, yeah, that's a really interesting and difficult question because, you know, when we start thinking about churches and schools, they have a huge impact on the public. They have huge sway over the public. So, for instance, you know, when folks think about and consider the way they worship and who they worship with and who they follow, that individual or individuals or that church has a huge impact. And so with that is also a huge responsibility. And I think that the way to engage, and obviously religion isn't the same as, say, for instance, someone who's elected, they you know, the religion, say, for instance, the Catholic Church, they have rules and they are responsible to the Pope, right? And so, but for the most part, they have a huge impact and influence over folks' thinking, right? And so that is, again, a double-edged sword. To some extent, religion has been hijacked. And you hear that where things that are non-religious being influenced and talked about, like who to vote for instance, in a religious forum. And so I think that, you know, it's a difficult problem. However, you know, to shun, you have to work within that construct. You have to work with your religious leaders, et cetera, and try to find common ground. I think that goes more towards Virginia's point, whereas we find common ground on things that everyone will agree with, right? Like the freedom of religion or freedom of worship. And the same thing with schools. Everyone wants great schools for their children and for their community. And so, but the school officials are elected. And you have a political angle there as well. And so the key is to not have these other things that have nothing to do with education or religion, to try to keep that outside of the discussion, so to speak. And so I don't know if I have a great answer for that question. Yeah, I think that it's more about engagement and accountability. I think that, you know, even if everyone believes something that's untrue, it's still untrue. And the opposite is true. If something is true and no one believes it, then it's still true. But, you know, how do you separate that from the context of what we see today?
Mm-hmm. That actually plays directly into Aaron Johnson's question that I'm going to pose to all three of you. So Aaron writes that in a time of increased polarization, tech companies are being accused by all sides of selective bias censorship. Should we attempt to hold tech companies, quote, accountable? And if yes, then how so? And I'm sorry, the question just disappeared for a second. Oh, there you go. And any thoughts on the Internet Bill of Rights? So would love to be able to get an answer to this. Abel, what do you think?
Yes, I think this is such an important question, especially right now. And the censorship is selective. The problem is we don't know why,
Okay.
to whom it's targeted against. We just know that it's being targeted against tons of people. A lot of people who, you know, cite peer-reviewed research. A lot of people who just kind of put out their opinions, and everyone in between. So if that's going to happen, and like we've said many times, we are held responsible for everything that we post online, then they should, as such, be held responsible for everything they remove online, including a lot of the things that I've had removed. And you don't always know which things those are. And there's zero transparency with how that works. There's zero accountability. And we need accountability from the top down, especially considering all of the power that they have. Because at some point we need to ask ourselves, what's more important, free thought, expression, and our culture, or the more profits at Facebook and Google?
I'm not allowed to answer that question. But I think one of the things that came out from, I think it was the Social Dilemma documentary, is that when you type in, for example, in a Google search, the topic of climate change, depending on where you live, that and the links that they showed you and the order that they respond to that search will be completely different. Based on, and also the algorithm will also be a part of what you've searched in the past and what you've clicked likes on and things like that. So it is definitely structured to play to your listening, if you will. And therefore you're consciously or unconsciously being drawn deeper and deeper and deeper into your own echo chamber, where you're not able to see or hear opposing points of view. And that's creating more polarization because everything that you're seeing is geared towards your, quote, being right. And if anybody dare cross that, then you are immediately, you know, respond almost knee-jerk, rabidly. So I think, you know, it's going to be interesting to see in the next, well, definitely through this election cycle, but in the next year or two, what happens with these type of algorithms and people's data and what the pushback is going to be on this. I found it ironic that the folks that were the worst offenders are now starting the nonprofits, trying to do their mea culpa and you know, buy their way back into heaven, so to speak. So I think that that's been a really, really interesting phenomenon, and we'll see if anyone even actually trusts their, gee, I'm sorry, let me help you cut your Facebook habit. Here's a 12-step program that my new nonprofit has created. So, you know, we'll see what happens there. I guess I wanted to also toss that over to Virginia and then Ken. Same question, you know, what do you think about the suppression of free speech and things like that? And the censorship, rather, sorry, wrong page. And then also I would love to get your thoughts on the Internet Bill of Rights.
Yeah, I think I'm excited to see what Ken has to say about this, especially with his background. But I think when it comes to censorship, everything that Abel said is spot on in terms of, you know, the things that individuals are doing are becoming increasingly kind of more, they're going to last forever, right? The digital record is going to be kept. But when it comes to what the tech companies themselves are doing, what algorithms that they have in place, what data that they have on us, you know, what kinds of things are going to be shut down, there's so much uncertainty there. And so I think it really does create this kind of, it's very fear-based, right? Like we don't even know exactly like just what's going on kind of in the real technological underpinnings of these companies, right? What algorithms, what's going to, you know, what keywords are going to ping something for review. So again, I'm excited to see what Ken has to say about this, but it's definitely a really big problem.
Ken,
Yeah, no problem. Boy, I tell you, this is fascinating, and I'm learning a lot from the panel. I have a lot to say on this particular subject.
Go ahead.
And so I think that, you know, censorship goes to the freedom of expression or freedom of speech, right? It's hand in hand there. And I think that the same way that individuals should be held accountable, so should companies as well. The problem is that it's so new, like Facebook and you know, we are evolving. I don't know what the landscape will look like in another 10 years. And so it'll be interesting to be in this seat talking about the same subjects 10 years from now. As far as the you know, the Internet Bill of Rights, I doubt that it will not be enforceable in any way. Right? I think there's powers that will prevent that from happening. It'll be a suggestion, and it'll have some rules, but it'll likely simply be voluntary. And so, and as far as, you know, consuming information and the algorithms and why this comes up in your feed versus something else. And so, you know, when you think about Twitter and Facebook, a lot of it can be manipulated. And it can be manipulated fairly easy. meaning that there are individuals out there, and I know this for a fact because I've spoken with them, who spend a lot of time trying to influence what comes up in your Google search. And they are actually paid. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but you know, if you have an army of folks clicking on certain things, that will trend. And now bots have taken over that. And so you see it all the time where there are bots that do all of these things that humans would otherwise do. And I think tech companies are trying to combat that, but you know, reality and the tech world are merging, you know, with deep fakes and things like that. And I won't go there either. But I think that these companies have their hands full. And so, you know, with freedom of speech, it's always going to be a conflict with that and public safety and the public good. It's just always going to be. And so, you know, one of the things that I wanted to, there's a little, not a test, but a scenario. And so I'd like to throw that out for not necessarily us, but for the folks listening to see, you know, how they would think about that. And I think it goes to this particular point. And so, for instance, if you publish the address of someone you disagree with politically, right? And there's other folks that disagree, and some of them may really disagree or may have really strong feelings about this person, and then they you post it on, say, Facebook or Twitter, and then that person becomes the victim of arson or worse, right? And it's proven that, you know, the arsonist, without your information, would not have known this particular person's address. Mm-hmm. Are you liable in any way? Or if, you know, the internet service provider, are they liable? Or if the Twitter or Facebook, are they liable? And those things are difficult, wicked things. And it may even boil down to intent, right? Do you intend to cause this person harm? The courts are going to decide that, right? And so if they do decide, then the person, the individual, becomes an accessory to a crime. But again, you know, you have this spongy area. What if the person was a suspected child molester? You know, everyone deserves their day in court. They hadn't been convicted. And the same thing happens. Then there's more sympathy towards the whistleblower. But right. Legally, there is no distinction there, right? It's not about how you feel, it's the law. And, you know, again, we can't say, hey, we wanna harm a president. That's a limitation that's not protected under free speech. If you know, have some intention to do that, or, you know, go in an airport and say, hey, you know, I have an explosive or something like that. But, you know, tie that to say a Twitter or a Facebook, you know, and then it becomes, okay, this person has done this 50 times, or this group is known to spread these sorts of things.
Right. Who's
responsible, right? And it has to go past bad press. I think there needs to be some sort of accountability. What that is up for a long, long discussion, and we could probably spend the next 8 months talking about that.
Well, I'm going to follow up a little bit from a question from Alan Inman. Do you feel that the advances of social media have enhanced the ability of law enforcement to effectively improve its image before the public? I'm actually going to go a little bit deeper on that question because I want us to talk about the limitations or belief system of the public's right to know, because you brought up the posting of somebody's address that may bring them harm. And so this is a particular passion of mine, is the public's right to know, and sometimes the need, quote, to be the town crier, if you will, puts folks in danger. And, you know, it's about a ratings hit more than it is about actually doing a service of giving information that's necessary. So, and Ken, I know you and I had spoken about that before, and I'd really love to be able to revisit the conversation with you on that.
Sure. And I think it's critically important that the public, that right to know, is protected, right? I think that it's, you know, anyone can and should be able to walk into a courtroom and listen to court proceedings and understand what's going on, and not just there. I think that, you know, there's a there's a right to know what our politicians and our leaders are doing and saying, right? Especially because there's so much impact on the country as a result of those things. And so there is simply no way to have influence over the process without actually knowing what's going on. So I think that is critically important. Again, however, I think that there are limits. There are things that should be protected. I think we talked about, and I remember seeing a clip from many, many years ago. No one will remember when we invaded Grenada, and we had grenades landing, and the press was right there.
Right, I do remember.
And so, okay, so we are of a certain age, and I think that, you know, that's a good thing. Totally. And so that, you know, again, that's just a small example, but there are limits, right? And the hard thing is to figure out where those boundaries lie, right? And so that's where you get the most, some things are clear. Clearly, the public has a right. Clearly, this has to stay secret. It's the in-between, it's the very narrow areas that will cause the most pain and the most discussion.
Yeah, there's been, you know, kind of snarky but important commentary that if Facebook existed during D-Day, if D-Day would have failed because you would have had so much posting on, you know, this, I heard from so-and-so, this is going to happen. And to me, it's a very scary time because I think that we've lost the ability to understand what should not be said. That does put national security at risk or personal security at risk in some ways. I wanted to, Abel, you're nodding quite a bit on this, so I would love to get your thoughts on this part of the conversation.
It's always going to be a balance, and I'll be quick because there's so many great questions coming in, but it's always going to be a balance. What I think we need is some ability to, yes, communicate with everyone and be on the hook forever, but also some combination of a space where you feel safe enough to express yourself and not be on the hook in the same way as if you were on a soapbox speaking truth to everyone forever. I think you need some sort of combination. You need to protect people too from being doxxed, from having their addresses out there. You know, me personally, having experienced, you know, a good taste of crazed fans and people coming to your door that you don't want, and people also in our community have been doxxed in exactly that way, and a lot of people just are constantly on the run, public figures, from that sort of thing. So you always need a balance, but at this point all of that balance and all of that in control is in the hands of unelected technocrats to some degree, all these people who built these platforms.
Great point.
And we need to take a step back and be like, yes, we need this, but why do they get to do it?
Hold that thought. I want to come back to that. Because I also wanted to go over to Virginia. And the question from Alicia Lawrence, that as a parent of teenagers that live and die on technology, what are the tips to help parents prevent their kids from being manipulated by social media? And this goes directly to everything from signing up for things they may not know, to attending something that they shouldn't be at, to just all of the Pandora's boxes that are open when that happens.
Yeah, so this is a great question. I think one thing that is important to realize, especially when you're parenting teenagers, which is a difficult task already, I think it's easy to kind of put up this technology piece as something that's kind of divisive, right? Or you kind of you feel so frustrated with your kids at being so wrapped up in something that it can really begin to a lot of tension. So I think one thing that's really important to note is that, it may feel like, okay, my teen's like addicted to social media or all these different things. A lot of the things that we do through technology are things that are actually very good human desires, right? We want to connect with people. We have these kind of innate things that we can't suppress that are intrinsic to who we are as humans and as teenagers even, right? Sort of that as they're beginning to experience independence and all those good things as well. So I think hopefully, you can begin to kind of build this sense of compassion even on your teenagers who maybe are very consumed, maybe even suffering mental health issues because of their relationship with technology. So I think really cultivating compassion as a parent and to recognize, okay, maybe even if they're going about in these crazy or unadvised ways, a lot of the reasons that they're engaging in things are actually, even to a harmful level, are because of their human desires. And tech companies know this, right? So there's lots of books that have been written. Hooked is one of them, where it talks about how people who, the tech companies have so well kind of just tapped into our brains, right? Our circuitry to take those human desires that we have and like get the clicks, right? Or get someone to open up an app when maybe they would have actually set it down otherwise. So I know I saw a study recently that showed, I can't remember exactly which company it was, I think maybe it was Facebook, where they'd actually been able to, through monitoring different app use, be able to track teenagers' kind of mental state, right? So if the child is feeling lonely, they send this thing that says, hey, so-and-so wants to connect with you, or hey, check out what your friends are just posted, or maybe they're going live or something like that. So I think as a parent, you need to help again, compassion is a really important base level. You want your kids to understand that you're on their side. You yourself, maybe you can talk about your struggles as an adult with how to handle technology and how maybe it disrupts your life in these ways that you don't want or intend. So going beyond that more practically, I think education is really important. So maybe this actually requires a little research on your side, but to understand one, how algorithms work. Maybe all the memes that they watch or look at on their phone are oftentimes created by bots, right? They're not even real people. So just helping them understand this is how technology works, and just giving them this base level of education, which I think is so lacking. I mean, I would love personally to see more like actual education within the school system on technology and how we can be using it well and to further our own aims rather than the aims of the technocrats, right? As you kind of maybe every couple weeks or every month, you bring up a new way that technology is designed, right? Maybe one month you can talk about, hey, here's the different algorithms that, as we were talking about earlier, maybe that's not the one to start with, but helping them understand, hey, you're going to get an echo chamber, even as a teenager, right? Maybe you're not like super interested, or maybe you are in like these political topics, but the things that you see and the opinions that you see are being very purposefully directed towards you. They're not what everyone else is seeing. When your friends open up their phones, they're not going to be seeing the same stream of memes or things. And someone in a different state or a different economic status, they're probably not going to be seeing the same things either. So helping them begin to understand how much of an echo chamber there is, even on something that seems very simple, right? Like memes or things like that. And also to understand that often humor and things like that are used to really promote a philosophy, right? Like if you can just kind of laugh and brush something off, it actually does so much more to kind of train your brain to ignore that piece of information than if it was actually addressed or countered with even non-true facts, right? So I think it's important for you to really have compassion and think about educating your children as well as being a role model. That's something that I think hopefully as a parent you're already doing, thinking about how you can be modeling for your children what their behavior should be in these different kinds of contexts. And as teenagers, that gets a little bit more difficult because, as I mentioned, there's this growing sense of independence and there's just a little bit of natural friction that comes there. But I think as you do model it and you talk about and you struggle with them about your own things, maybe ask their advice. Hey, this political issue came up. I'm not really sure how to deal with it. You're the one that's tech savvy. Let's walk through it and talk through together how this might have happened or what's being actually going on here. So that would be my advice to parents of teenagers. And again, that's prayers for you, because that's the difficult thing.
Well, I'm gonna point to news that came out a few days ago that the Kardashians are actually going off their television series, Keeping Up with the Kardashians. But and then apparently Kim decided that she would join the protest by staying off of Instagram for a whole 24 hours, protesting something, I can't remember what. But you know, there is something called the Kardashian effect. That's been written about quite a bit over the past decade, actually, that they've been pushing their things, and it's definitely correlated, besides the rise of Instagram and now TikTok, of the mental health issues, and especially of teenage girls that want to be able to look like you know, the influencers that they admire, and how they're dissatisfied with not only their physicality, but they want to be known for being famous for sex tapes, or they want to be known for, you know, and years ago, when Sandra Day O'Connor retired from the Supreme Court, she found that her grandkids could not name the members of the Supreme Court, but they could name every judge on American Idol. And so, you know, there's been a conscious dumbing down, if you will, of society that social media and technology has fueled. And so I guess what I would love to be able to ask the three of you and kind of do a bit of a deep dive on this question is, have we opened up Pandora's box so much, especially with the pandemic, where social media and Zoom and all these other online things is all we really have to connect? I mean, there was a question that I will get back to over here, that people are not actually picking up the phone and talking to each other. They're texting and Zooming and things, but there's a lack of connection that is at the same time as the technology explosion, at the same time as the pandemic, which makes a necessity of the technology explosion, and has impacted our lack of our ability to connect. So I guess what I'd love to be able to ask the three of you is, has Pandora's box been opened so much that there's no way to close it? Or I guess for another cliche, has the genie been out of the bottle and there's no way to put the genie back in? I mean, and at the same time, the impact on our education of history, for example, of other things. Like there's the same study that came out today, or that I saw posted today, that, you know, the number of 2/3 of people under 40 don't know that the Holocaust happened. A certain percentage of those folks that don't know what happened also are blaming the Jews if it did happen. So I mean, how do we solve these gigantic equations that inform our ability to relate to one another? If we're dependent upon a technology that's highlighting, if you will, the vapid. And I just gave away my opinion, but you know, how do we move forward as a society to be able to understand how to harness what we've let go of, I guess. Ken, why don't I start with you? Because you and I are old, and so we can go there.
Yeah. It is a Pandora's box so anyway, you know, here's the thing, right? You know, I have two grown children. They're not teenagers anymore. They're early and mid-20s, and so, but they were teenagers, and so I think they were right at the edge of the explosion of social media, right? Like right there when it started exploding. You know, people don't necessarily. A person asks a question, so they want to know. People generally parenting advice. They want someone to protect their kids, right? But they don't want someone telling them how to raise their kids. And right. that goes to so, you know, and this is going to be controversial, but this is what I did, right? And so, you know, what is a child's expectation of privacy under your roof as a minor, right? And so, I checked on my children. I wanted to know what they were consuming. And, a lot of people will say that is wrong. And that's fine. We can have that discussion, and I'm happy to have it. And there's some downsides to that as well, right? If kids no longer trust that, you give your, anyway, but that was not my concern. My concern was that what were they consuming, right? And, what I tried to do with my children was to get them to think. Like one, I would say, hey, be careful believing something you can't independently verify. I would also implore them to have healthy skepticism, not question everything, but just some healthy skepticism. And I tried to empower them with a foundation of good judgment and common sense, right? And so I think that's probably all you can do, really. At the end of the day, they are themselves and they're going to make choices. But if they have that foundation, right, from where you have that control, but then there's the education, and then the foundation is laid, and then they're free to do to ruin their life or to become great people, or et cetera, right? And I don't know if there's much beyond that you can actually to protect them, so to speak. I think that it's a different Pandora's box. There was always a way to get into mischief and trouble and use not technology necessarily, but your brother's car or something like that to get into places and things you shouldn't be necessarily. But it's different, and so we have to adjust accordingly. But I think the basic foundation of how you do things or how you interact with your children, it has still some relevance today.
Okay, I agree on that. So Virginia, what about you? I think you're maybe the youngest one on the panel. So you may have grown up during the time I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think so. I definitely I would say, grew up without that much technology. So didn't have a TV, didn't have a phone until I was, I think 20. So whenever I went to college, wow. I got a phone, so we had we did have like computers. We had, my brothers and stuff were into programming and things like that. So that was one piece of technology that we did have. But one thing that I think was really interesting for the period of time that I grew up in, when it was kind of this weird in between, right? Like things were starting to emerge. Social media wasn't even a thing yet, at least not in my early childhood and even middle school. But, we kind of got to see a lot of the systems behind things, right? So we saw Google before there was like as many algorithms. We saw kind of people were interested in coding and things like that at that time because it was all so new, right? So the geeky, nerdy people were really into that. And so we saw a lot of the underlying systems. And so I think even more so than people who came after me, really to be able to see, okay, this is like, there are people behind this, right? Who are changing things. And we, like I said, kind of seeing that more systemic level. But then when it came to things like social media, right? Like I got a Facebook account pretty early on, back when it was just for like college students. And I had like, happened to have like a school-based email, right? So like allowed me to join it back in those days. And like looking back, I wish I've deleted my Facebook account now. Mm-hmm. It would have been like, I mean, as we've said, those things that I put out there are still there. Even if, someone can type my name in and it's not going to pop up, but behind the scenes, that information is still there. And I think that the way technology has just kind of skyrocketed, that we are kind of just as a society and as a person, I was not really aware of what I was getting into. And I think this kind of goes to Ken's point, even how do you protect people who are minors in your household? Mm-hmm. Now, unfortunately, a lot of parents, even at that time, didn't really understand, because it was a new technology, really what it was, right? Like, oh, this is just like a yearbook kind of thing where you see people's faces and you can like post things. Like there just wasn't any kind of understanding of what it would lead to. And so a lot of parents even encourage their kids to get a Facebook back in that time. So now I think I would encourage parents to be a lot more hesitant, right? Like actually help your child understand and maybe prevent them, but help them understand what they're getting into. When you post something, it's there, it's on the digital record. And so to maybe, to protect the minors that are in your household. And I think the same, not to go into this rabbit trail, but I think the same thing goes for small children, right? If you're posting a lot of pictures of them on social media,
100%.
just recognize that there are a lot of risks to that. And so to really take your responsibility as a guardian of a minor pretty seriously. So I'll just leave that there, but I think there is a little bit of the Pandora's box for especially those of us who maybe got into things or got into platforms before we really understood what was going on. So I think we need more people, more voices out there helping educate people. I think we need more people, even in Congress, who understand technology, who can really make some wise, decisions and help us to create some good public policy as well. So I think yes, Pandora's box has been opened, but I also don't think that means that there isn't a way forward. So I'm excited to see more good people, more good voices who understand that there's a lot of nuance to these things, be able to come out and help us really know what we're getting into.
I like the expression technocrats. I'm wondering if it's, I mean, I share your hope. I'm far more of a old cynic. So, Abel, I'd love for you to weigh in on this one, because this is your bread and butter in one way, but it's also a place where I'm sure you have a lot of. I'm going to assume that you have mixed feelings.
I do, and an awesome question that kind of goes along with it just came in from Judson Wells. I'll just read it. Is it possible that preventing kids from utilizing social media and technology will hold them back from their peers in terms of newer social interaction and technological problem solving? Awesome question. So I grew up in the middle of nowhere in New Hampshire, also without TV, without cable. I didn't have my first phone. I think I was also 20 in college the first time I had it. But since I've been an online creator where, all of our businesses have run on this, and there have been multiple, even so, we've taken a year off from social media twice over those 10 years with many breaks in between. Yeah, for better or worse, right? Mentally, for better. Every single time, every minute you spend away from social media, almost without exception, you're going to be better. What I will say, though, is that there's the difference between social media and connecting with people. That's the bait and switch. So we all kind of got on there because the promise was that they were connecting the world, they were making the world a better place. The bait and switch was that no, they weren't, and here we are. So when you take a step back from social media, let's just dial back a year from right now. Not even social media. Let's talk about technology. At least in the online health space, a lot of people raising children were talking about how unhealthy screen time is in general. Just screen time, whether it's social media or not. And everyone pretty much agreed, screen time is bad for people, really bad. Then the pandemic hits, and all of a sudden, by legal decree, we're all on the internet all the time for work, for play, for, being students. We're forced to be in front of screens nonstop, with no sports, with no arts, with no connecting with each other. And so to counteract that, I think it's so important that people do connect in the real world in whatever way they can, to nurture those family relationships, the close friends. And when you combine connecting with people virtually with that in-person connection, there is magic there, because you can keep in touch with people no matter where they are in the world. That is a magical, magical thing. But you have to see the internet and all of this technology as a tool, because if you don't, it will be using you and stealing your time and your energy. And for kids,
and your data,
not to mention, and then manipulating you because of that. So when you take a step back, like a year ago, all of this stuff was bad for us. Now we have to do it all the time. When I grew up, none of it existed. It's completely irrelevant. We don't need Facebook at all. We don't need Instagram. We don't need Twitter. They don't really do anything unique or interesting anymore. It's not running on new technology or innovation. It's just kind of there. And so as soon as there's something that's better, that fosters more free expression, more free connection between people, Facebook will go the way of MySpace, and I'm looking forward to that day. But let me just quickly address will it hold kids back if they're not on that technology? No, I don't think so, because you won't be able to actually prevent them. You can try to limit it, but you can't 100% prevent it. So they're going to learn it if they want to learn it.
Yeah, go
just
ahead.
quickly and add to I've known a couple parents who've had a lot of success, especially with younger children, but even older ones, to when they start out their day have kind of a mandatory 1 or 2 hours where they can't use technology at the beginning of their day before they touch any technology whatsoever at all. Because that allows the mind, the synapses, to really begin firing in a way that allows them to have independent thought, that allows them to have that alone time within their own brain that they really need to be developing and mentally, physically, emotionally, right, to be able to move around the room, to really get their bodies moving. So, and what's interesting is that a lot of times, I've known a couple parents who have done this as kind of an experiment at first, and their kids would say have this mandatory 1 hour in the morning that they have to spend without any screens. And the kids get so wrapped up in their own play or their own imagination that they totally forget once the hour is up that they can have the screen time. So that's one very practical example. And I would say from the technological perspective, if you're worried about your kid falling behind, one, being on social media doesn't really increase their technological problem solving that much, but there's a lot of great things like you've heard of a Raspberry Pi. It's a little mini computer. Kids can actually tinker around with the hardware. There's a lot of great like little projects for kids to do, and even older kids to be able to do that really actually does improve their technological capacity. So those are just 2 examples that I would offer up.
Very, very cool. We've got about 10 minutes left, and so I'm seeing whether or not we can have time to answer a live question or not, but I also want to let everyone know that regardless of us being live, we will be answering all of your questions.
Okay. So can I just say something about this last question as well? Okay, yeah, I know we're moving on, but I can't agree more with Virginia and Abel about that subject. I mean, they killed it right on. And what I would say when I hear questions like that, it's, the devil's always in the narrative. Right. And
right.
So when they create a question like, do you believe that your children will, somehow be behind their peers? That's a loaded question. Right. I would say, in what way? Like, how are you defining behind their peers? Their ability to text really fast or something along those? That I don't care about. And so I think that is a loaded type question without context. People would say, no, I don't want my child falling behind, but that's Virginia. She made a great point. They're not falling behind anything. And, there's other ways to keep connected. There's magic when, people can connect in the right way. And I don't think that, any of these platforms are doing anything innovative. And so, you can't lock your children up. You can't hide them from what's going on. Empower them, again, with common sense and judgment. But then also, and I know this isn't popular everywhere, is that, you can limit their time and then figure out what they're consuming.
I agree. So I'm going to actually ask, John Victor poses an absolutely fantastic question to end this discussion on. So he writes, the increasing algorithmic suppression of free speech in combination with the prohibition against group gatherings appears to be driving everyone into an information gulag. If the restrictions from the pandemic are extended indefinitely, what role might there be for subversive public gatherings as a form of protest against the rising technocratic order? So this speaks to obviously a different part of the First Amendment, and combines it essentially, right? The free speech and right to gather. So I would very much like this to be our last question. That way we can take us much time, quote unquote, as we need on this one. I'm going to start with Abel on this one.
I kind of went to one this past weekend, to be honest. We live out here in rural Colorado, and when you have the ability to connect with real people in a natural way, it's a wonderful, magical thing that you cannot replace that. People know that it exists; they'll seek it out again. So I don't see this as permanent. But I'll share a quick little story. I went out for a run, and this was a couple weeks ago. And for the first time, I met one of these neighbors at this house I always run by, because his dog was coming up to me. I was out of gas. I'm at the top of the hill. He comes up to me, and he says, "Hi," and he shakes my hand. He looks me in the eye. And after that moment, I realized that was the first stranger's hand I held in my hand in many months, like pretty much the whole year.
Yeah.
And when when our eyes met, we shook our hands. We're like, okay, we are in this together. It's not that cliched term that like all these people are throwing around. It's like we can actually be humans together here, and you can never take that away. So I think it's important that everyone make accommodations in the short term and think that out. But there's no way that they can prevent culture from happening, prevent us from getting together as humans. It's so natural. We need it. Socializing is a nutrient. So the pendulum will swing back.
So I have to ask you, were you wearing a mask, and did you use hand sanitizer right afterward?
We had our temperature taken at the door, and masks were optional, but they recommended that you stay, maintain your distance, especially from what they called the elders, the people who were kind of in the sensitive group. And so it's not like nothing ever happened. Some people were wearing masks, most people weren't, but it was all outside too.
No, I'm talking about when you met your neighbor.
Oh, no mask whatsoever at that whole household. And for me running outside in a rural area, no.
And shaking hands.
We shook hands, and it was a wonderful experience.
I understand. Virginia, what about you on this question?
Yeah, I think this is a really great question. And like Abel said, there is something that's really kind of just that cannot be replaced by having in-person meetings, in-person contact, right? And so I think that we will find ways to express that. I think that there is maybe a concern, maybe it's not so much in the short term, right? But as we get generations that are becoming more and more accustomed to not actually having that in-person connection, it's still going to be there. That need is still going to be there, right? Like if you go back to studies of children who are raised with all the proper physical nutrition and everything, but they're not held by someone, they're not loved by someone, that
Right.
causes a lot of developmental, physical, emotional, mental, psychological disabilities. And so, I think I am concerned that not just in the short term, but in the long term, as we have, I'm almost 30, and I'm kind of I would say one of the last people who really remembers a time before life was like digitally mediated. So I think as we have more generations who are just accustomed to that, and with the pandemic and the way things are turning out there, that will be an issue, not just in the next 2 years, but in the next 10 and 15 and 30 years, just to see what those repercussions are. But to get to the question more specifically, I think as we can to, maybe this doesn't look like, hey, let's get 10,000 people together and all cough on each other, right? But to say, let's really be intentional about, I know some people have created their quarantine circles, right?
Right.
Like I've got the other 5 families that we've all been exposed to each other. We're all very safe with going out and meeting other people. So we're going to have that in-person meetings in time. So I think it's really important for us to cultivate those relationships and try to seek them out in the ways that we can.
Agreed. So Ken, up to you to bring us home.
Sure. I think we need national level leadership here when it comes to, people will listen to and follow their leaders. And so I think that's one of the biggest things that is needed. And I won't say if it's happening or not happening, but we need national level unity. And I think that I agree that we are social beings and that we need human to human contact, right? Those things will not evolve as fast as technology. Technology is evolving a lot fast, and that's part of the problem. Our brains can't keep up with technology, and so we are reacting in a certain way to a technology that's moving a lot faster than we can adjust to, right? And that's going to be tough. I think that, you know, we should connect with precautions, right? We know there's about 4 things that we can do to protect ourselves and still be social. Like Virginia said, there's neighbors, and there's some not far from here, where at a cul-de-sac, and they've all agreed that they would quarantine together. Not sure if that's 100% effective, but that probably does a lot to lessen, if everyone agrees and everyone abides. But, you know, that's a different subject completely. To me, it's been fascinating to see and look at human tolerance level, right? So we all agree that humans are social beings and that this can't go on forever, right? We can't say, hey, stay in your house and only leave for 1 or 2 things, exercise and get something, you know, food or medicine. Right. So but it's been fascinating to see the tolerance level. Some people are, you know, don't come to my house, I'll see you in a year or 2 when this is all over. And some people are like dying to get out. And so that is truly fascinating and unfolding. So, you know, without, say, a vaccine, how do we combat this? We've seen in other countries where as soon as they get some sort of hold around this thing or get it under control, as soon as other things start opening, we act like humans and, you know, the numbers start going up and then they have to start over again. So I don't have the answer. What I'm saying is that, you know, as human beings, we have personal responsibility, but at the other end of the spectrum, it's still fascinating to see, you know, how this is, as far as tolerance level, how people are reacting. And yeah, I think again, you know, circling back, we need national level leadership and unity.
Well, I'm getting the high sign that we're done, and I'm very grateful to all of you. Thank you, Abel, Virginia, and Ken. And thanks to Julianne for the tech help. And you guys have all convinced me to throw my iPhone into the ocean and to never, ever be on Facebook ever again. So thank you all very much. I'm going to try your best practices when I wake up tomorrow morning.
Mission accomplished.
Thank you very much. And I look forward to connecting with all of you in a human way very soon. And thanks for all our attendees as well. Thank you so much.